Hi, I'm Sally O'Driscoll from Resisting Project 2025, and I'm pleased to welcome two people here who stepped up early into resistance in the Trump administration's battle against higher education. They're both professors at Rutgers University in New Jersey, David Salas-de Cruz from the Department of Chemistry and Paul Boxer of the Department of Psychology. And I will tell you a little bit more about them in a while, but we are talking to them because they were among the first to formally organize among universities when they wrote their resolution to establish a mutual defense compact for the universities of the Big Ten Academic Alliance in defense of academic freedom, institutional integrity, and the research enterprise in March 2025. So let's have a little bit of background here. The battle lines in the Trump administration's attack on higher education were drawn almost immediately in his second presidency. In the beginning of March, he stripped $400 million of federal research funds from Columbia University, and then they later went against Harvard University, threatening to revoke its tax-exempt status. Many other universities, the Justice Department's task force to combat anti-Semitism, originally listed 60 universities that would be investigated. So the ostensible justification for the withholding of federal funding that is vital to any major university's work was that wokeism and DEI programs allowed anti-Semitism to flourish on campuses, supposedly because Columbia in particular had allowed student protests about the war on Gaza to continue in their campus. Trump claimed that his main goal in going after universities was to protect Jewish students. Michael Roth, president of Wesleyan University, responded to that by saying, Jew hatred is real, but today's anti-Semitism isn't a legitimate effort to fight it. It's a cover for a wide range of agendas that have nothing to do with the welfare of Jewish people. Still, on July 23rd, Columbia reached a settlement with the administration which required it to pay the government $200 million over the next 3 years and to broaden its commitment to combating anti-Semitism in exchange for having hundreds of millions of dollars in federal grants reinstated. 10 days earlier, Columbia had incorporated the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism into both its anti-discrimination policies and the work of its Office of Institutional Equity. So just a note, for recently, on August 15th, U.S. District Judge Stephanie Gallagher, a Trump appointee, ruled that the U.S. Education Department acted unlawfully when it issued 2 guidance documents telling institutions to dismantle DEI programs. Nonetheless, some elite universities have brokered or are in the process of brokering deals with the administration. We'll talk more about the details of that. So obviously, we could give a long list of details about which universities have been targeted in which particular ways, but the takeaway is this. The Trump administration demands allow the government to determine curriculum, which is a keystone of university education, faculty governance of curriculum. So this politicizes higher education and ends academic freedom. Government control of universities is the hallmark of autocratic regimes and not democracies. The withholding, second point, the withholding of federal research funds has brought scientific research in the US to a grinding halt. The cost to medical innovation and other life-saving research will be devastating and long-lasting because many ongoing studies have been canceled and can't be easily restarted. It will also be difficult to reconvene the personnel who ran the studies. As the Chronicle of Higher Education puts it, higher ed leaders have an urgent task to make politicians and the public understand that basic research is nonpartisan and essential, that it leads to more powerful medicines, better crime detection, technologies that improve everyday life, and a 5-fold return on every dollar invested. But the attack on higher ed goes back before the election. In the campaign, Trump and J.D. Vance repeatedly depicted top universities as overrun by Marxists, maniacs, and lunatics, and J.D. Vance derided them as insane. But as far back as 2021, Vance gave a talk called "The University is the Enemy," in which he named universities as hostile to conservatism. And note that Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance both hold degrees from Ivy League universities. The preparation for the anti-Semitism claim was also made earlier in December 2023 when Representative Elise Stefanik grilled the presidents of Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, and MIT at a congressional hearing. And last but not least, the attack on higher education is a step that was clearly laid out in Project 2025. And that document outlines the withholding of federal research funds, the elimination of area studies programs, the requirement to hire conservative faculty members, and the revision of the accreditation system. All of that can be found in that document on pages 352 to 356. So after setting that scene, I want to introduce Dr. David Salas-de Cruz and Dr. Paul Boxer. Dr. Salas-de Cruz is a professor of chemistry at Rutgers. His research is on designing new types of materials for the medical, environmental, and energy fields. Dr. Boxer is a professor of psychology. His area of interest is in juvenile delinquency and juvenile justice for youth in high-risk environments. So Professor Salas-de Cruz and Boxer brought their resolution to establish the Mutual Defense Compact to the Rutgers Faculty Senate on March 28th. And the Big Ten, who they were addressing in that document, includes 18 large, predominantly public universities that together enroll about 600,000 students each year. And so the compact quickly drew momentum. And let's notice the difference between these public institutions and the elite institutions that Trump first went after. So let's start by thinking why you two stepped up in this way, why you two in particular felt that this compact was the way to go. And it was a moment when many people were so stunned by the ferocity of the attacks that they didn't respond at all. So could both of you address, what brought you to the point of understanding that this needed to be responded to?
You want me to start? So, I want the general public to understand, our job. I'm a associate professor in the Department of Chemistry, and I teach. I do research, I mentor students, and I do administrative work around the university. Um, Within the mentoring students, around December of last year, this is where you start recommending the students to apply to PhD programs, and you start recommending the undergraduate students that are working in your lab to start applying to research during the summer in other universities via an NIH program or via the NSF REU. So on December, I started like a typical year sending, are you going to apply for PhD? You're ready. Deadlines are coming in December 15. You have to have all the applications ready. My students apply. Already we knew that, the Trump administration had won the election. But during his first term, there was no big changes on education. So we were not concerned, at least in my lab, we were not concerned. We were just working as normal. We didn't see until he went into the office on late January when we started seeing the big changes within the addition of the Dodge team, and they start attacking the NIH. They just went directly to the jugular. USA got caught. I want to remind the public, I also had a grant in USA that I was done, but it did not affect it because it was done, but it was with Paraguay. We were doing ethical research in material science in Paraguay. So they caught it. NIH start firing all the directors, and I start getting concerned because we also apply to NIH, and I know groups that apply to NIH that fund my student. First, we have the URISE, which is a very competitive grant from the NIH that takes students that wants to go to PhD. They get them early on into training. And the great thing about this grant is that they pay tuition and a stipend, which means that a student in my university in Camden, which is a urban university for inner city in the region, mostly our students want to stay home. The responsibilities of my students is they need to help to pay for rent or pay for the house, help the families. That means that these grants, instead of the student going to work at Walmart or at another store, they actually can stay in my lab and I could do training. But again, these are top students. So even though top students 4.0, they still need to do that. They actually go work to help mom and dad or help grandma. So by the time that it was flowing, things, me and Paul already were part of the Senate executive meeting. We start seeing the effects that they were attacking Colombia very directly, and that's we start engaging this in our meetings in the Senate about what was happening, more like an update, what is happening in Colombia. Um, and pretty much they stopped the grants. When they stopped the grants, I start getting concerned myself. I'm like, wow, do the government really have this power to just stop the grant for something? And then in my mind and also in Paul's mind, as we were all engaging in all this dynamics, we were start getting concerned. This is already in March, early March. This is where now my students are receiving the acceptance letters, no? So at that time, my students are, hey, I got accepted at this REU program. They're happy. I got two students and I'm a graduate program director. So I also mentor the graduate student. They start getting the letter acceptance to PhD programs. And guess what? When all these NIH grants start getting caught, the second email they receive, hey, wait a second, your phone might be caught. So we will update you soon about your acceptance. All my students went into this stress mode, and that's not fair. These are little kids. These are students that have worked so hard. They're high achiever. They have done the right thing. Some of them participate in summer research. They participated in the year research. They're ready to do the PhD, and now they're very concerned. And then my other students for the summer program, the same thing. The student was very concerned about that I received an email that the fund might be rescinded. And this is it. You only have one summer. That's it. So imagine the stress of this student that their grant will be done. They will not be able to do their research in the summer, which might affect them later on to be a competitive student to do PhD. That's the idea, no?
So what you're saying is that immediately as you came back, you are training the next generation of scientists to do innovative work to keep the US scientific engine moving forward. Not only that, but you are also doing social mobility. You are providing a place
Yes,
to bring new students into the pipeline, training them to
absolutely.
be part of this. And you're
Yeah,
seeing that being taken down just in a second. And
In a second, just like that, without
just like that,
warning,
right?
all these grants were just done without warning because they found some random word that then a lot of these grants start fighting back and say, I don't do that type of research. Just that word is there.
yeah, and I
So
think uh,
An immediate effect on everything that you do. So, Paul, can you add from your perspective how that affected you? Is it the same immediate effect?
yeah, and I think what is interesting about talking about grants. I mean, I think the grants were sort of the first big sign that something was changing in a way that was going to be problematic for higher education because the cuts were quite fast, quite immediate, as David says. Funding with these letters came and instantly the pipe was turned off. But I think what's important to keep in mind with respect to scientific research funding, a lot of the conversation about it obviously revolves around NIH, which is probably the largest funder of a lot of the work that we do. It's medical as well as basic lab science, things like that. But it's also important to keep in mind there are other federal agencies that fund research that is very removed from the lab science that David is talking about. So, for example, for many years, a lot of my work has been funded by the Centers for Disease Control, as well as the Department of Justice. I've had some funding on juvenile justice work and gun violence and these kinds of issues, which are very applied sorts of projects that take place in communities. So the first very noticeable thing for me was that I was working with some colleagues to develop a new funding proposal for the National Institute of Justice around community violence prevention. And within days of the new administration sort of taking power and the grant announcements being made, I went back onto the website to take a look at the funding announcement to make sure things were still in place, and they were all gone. The National Institute of Justice canceled all of its open calls for proposals, which every early in the year, yearly they would announce a slate of new proposals that people could compete for, and they were just all gone, just completely gone. And
And
so to me, that was, well, so that was work on, nothing like, the chemistry and lab science that David is talking about. We're talking about projects that directly relate to community safety and violence reduction. The issues that the administration is now saying are so problematic that we have to order the military to patrol the streets, when we already had tons of fantastic applied scientific studies showing all these different ways to reduce violence and crime and that sort of thing. So yeah, the grants was like that was the first visible, to us working in a research university like Rutgers, where so much of what we do is research, mentorship, and conducting our own research and that sort of thing. This was very much the most visible thing right off the bat. That seemed very problematic. And just as a quick aside to throw this out there, you mentioned social mobility. Rutgers Newark, I actually don't know about Camden. You guys might be there too, but I only focus on the Newark stuff. Our university campus is routinely in the top 10 for promoting social mobility of our graduates.
Absolutely. We are that. We are in the top 40s in terms of social mobility. I mean, we're a state university. We bring everybody to our university and we push them forward.
So both of you doing vital work in completely different areas, but both incredibly important, and also developing a new cadre of researchers. So
absolutely. That's the last sentence is the key. And I want the public to understand this grant is all training. We have undergraduate students, graduate students. Sometimes we even bring high school students. So when we're talking about grants, you say, oh, that money goes to work on all this to pay. I pay tuition, I pay stipend. This is how I get the students stay in the lab.
Yes, and this is how new innovation happens.
Absolutely.
So this was what drove you immediately to respond, seeing that all of your work was going to be held up with
I think
effects.
Not from my perspective of the work. I think I was more in my student. I thought it was not fair that my students were suffering. That is the key thing for me. I'll figure it out. I always have to figure it out myself. I'll figure out what to do next. But my students are starting. That's what started my fire in. It's like I need to protect my student, create a shield, because I don't want them that stressed. When a student is stressed, their grades plummet, especially in my environment.
But your work is your students, right?
Yes, absolutely. It came from that sense. It came from me trying to shield my students so they'll not be aware. It's like, and I will talk to them. Don't worry. I think we will fix it. We will fix it, or I will fix it. Don't worry. Your acceptance will be fine. And from those 3-4 students, only one at the end of the day did not get the funds, but then he was accepted at another university for a PhD and got the fund in that university. But imagine that.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think, like, as we're sort of alluding to here, seeing the call to eliminate some of this grant funding was sort of the first sign, but it wasn't just that, and it didn't stop at that. I mean, I think the reason that many of us were so concerned by the way in which Doge or whoever was going about making these cuts was that they were very clearly, and I don't think anybody would even debate this, even the folks who were doing this, politically motivated cuts, in the sense of we're going to cut grant research that targets certain words, certain areas, certain topics. It would have been one thing. Now, it would have been devastating if an administration come in and said, you know what, we don't fund science anymore, we don't do science. They're all cut, right? That obviously would be very damaging, but that is not what happened. What happened was we're going to cut certain topics that we disagree with. And in fact, well, we'll come back to this. I'll talk about Linda McMahon in a bit. I have a quote from her up here that's worth talking about. But that signaled that the administration was interested not only in what kinds of federal funds were being used to support certain kinds of research projects, but interested in the ways in which the higher education sector was addressing everything. So if grants targeted on certain topics are first, and we're going to continue pushing on universities, what's going to come next? Classes that target those issues, students who represent those communities that some of those issues might affect, faculty who teach courses on those topics. Are we talking now about a greater incursion into the institutional autonomy and integrity of higher education institutions?
And of course, that is exactly what happened.
Yes.
So you two immediately understood the direction that this is going to. Although, David, you did say you thought you were going to be able to fix it and get the money back. But let's for a second see how your compact worked in other universities. I mean, it spread quite quickly. What's the total number of other universities that have signed on? What has the response been?
I just want to before we start that, so I want to finish is all this materialized when Rutgers also got in March 10 the letter that we were one of those 60 universities that we're going to be. And at that moment, we were already suffering all this already. And this is where Paul and I start engaging about, wait a second, in our meetings, we cannot protect ourselves. There's a lot of money to do that. And this is where the evidence was Colombia. So Colombia, 400 millions out, they were screaming in terms of the pain that that is causing to the university. And that started the idea of, at the same time, is like how you start engaging with the administration where, imagine, I mean, we are a public university. We don't have that money just to give away like that. And I think this is where everything started materializing, is to start thinking about creating something that enable us to protect. And this is where Paul and I got a message to join this Big Ten meeting. This is where Big Ten faculty meet, all these 18 institutions. This is the same time that the March Madness is happening, basketball is happening. And I think at that moment, also I was in a conference where in the talk of the conference was all this, what will happen about the research. So I think when me and Paul talk about, we went to this conference about what we could do, how we can survive. I think this is where we also got the idea of, wait a second, also the Trump administration was also making a lot of fuss about NATO. And this is where everything got connected into, can we form a university NATO with the Big Ten? We already do sport together. We already do research together. Why we cannot defend ourselves? And this is where the documents that you saw, this is what it materialized within that thought.
And of course, you make a really important point. The position of public institutions is completely different than the elite universities that have huge endowments and have the kind of money to fight in that particular way. You had to fight in a different way. And at the same time, also quickly realizing that the cuts were politically targeted, that they were not across the board. So, so Paul, tell me a little bit more about who responded after you produced your document. And
yeah, so we, in a university senate, and I think many faculty at other universities who are engaged in this kind of governance structure will say, we're used to passing resolutions and making statements that essentially go to our president and maybe nowhere beyond that, right? So we speak to each other, we speak to our president, sometimes our board members hear what we say, but it's an internal governance process. So we passed this resolution that David spearheaded to propose this compact and direct Rutgers to reach out to the other Big Ten universities and establish this alliance and so on and so forth. But that was an internal document. We passed it in the Senate. Someone emailed it to the president. That was on a Friday. But somehow, unbeknownst to us, a link to the PDF where that resolution was written was shared out to some folks. I guess people shared it with their friends and colleagues and that sort of thing. And somebody on the Blue Sky social media site picked it up and shared it and said, "Here, look, this looks like a great way for universities to come together." And that just caught fire and went viral over the weekend. And all of a sudden, we were hearing from people at different universities in the Big Ten and beyond about how can we join this compact? How can we do something like this at our university? And so over a period of the next couple of months, I think it's about the time scale, we're now at something like 50 to 60 other universities have signed on, but signed on in the sense of they have passed their own resolutions imploring their own university leadership to engage in a compact like this. There is no compact currently that exists. There's nothing for other universities to sign on to per se, but the concept that has really caught on is this idea that yes, the presidents of these universities are the ones who sort of have ultimate responsibility for messaging and engaging, whatever the university is going to do. But these are universities that are comprised of thousands of faculty and academic staff who have a real, sincere, long-standing, and vested interest in the integrity and the strength and the persistence of of higher education as a whole, right? So this even goes beyond like union organizing. This goes beyond, advocacy around wages and benefits and that sort of thing. This is about faculty, mostly faculty. I mean, some of the senates are mixed in terms of staff and faculty, but a lot of them are faculty senates. This is about faculty coming together and saying, we believe in this enterprise of higher education. We believe in the integrity of our institutions, and we believe in academic freedom and why we do this in the first place. We do not want these things infringed upon through political activities that are designed to undermine them.
Yeah, and that's another important point. Nobody becomes a professor unless they do really care about the process of higher education and all of the points that you just made. So, okay, so other people are now, as you say, it went viral. Other people are now signing on in their own ways. So, how would you say that has been able to make a difference? Are faculty being able to respond in kind of more organized ways and to argue that their presidents the presidents of universities should respond? For example, the president of Rutgers, how did they respond to the fact of being on the list of universities to be investigated? Well, how is this trickling down through the entire system is what I'm really asking.
Yeah. So so right now, this is what it's doing, is unifying faculty. I think this document, when we become, social media and it's spread, I think faculties were looking to do something, but nobody knew what to do. And what we did is we focused the energy into a specific area. So this has unified faculty and has started to create faculty coalition. And I want you to understand, and the public to understand, something very important. Over the last 30 years, chair governance at university has been declined, where faculty have lost some of our voices, and specifically in some of the states that are Republican, some of this chair governance is almost non-existent. So this has been happening. So I think what did is start engaging all the faculty into some coalition. Um, and this is also telling the president, say, hey, you're not by yourself. The faculty is also here, and we also with you if you're ready to defend the university. So over the period of that month, me and Paul started working really hard also to connect with the Big Ten's university, having meetings with the Big Ten's group, and each of them started to create their own version of the defense. This is where you go to this link, and each university has their little version. But since chair governance has been eroded, we have been little by little engraving and engaging with the administration and our governance structure within the university. In the time that we passed that, unfortunately, our president was leaving. He left, he resigned the position. So based on his comment, he said, look, I'm in lame duck. I cannot do much about this right now. But he gave us an instruction, keep working with the faculty groups. And so we did that. So we worked on the faculty group. But also, I think this also give our president a little bit of energy in terms of when my faculty's with this, and he signs letters. He joined amicus brief with other universities, and I think this also led to that. I think he also felt like the faculty wanted to see something and being on the defense. But that did not stop us. So what you see in this side, this is a work that Paul and we joined with our Senate members, and with our Senate member, we start spreading the voice. Something that this as soon as this pass and it becomes part of the Senate, it's not like me and Paul own it anymore. Now this is owned by everybody. But we were spearheading. We have a great group of Senate here, like Anna and Heather, where they were very passionate about this as well, and we have started spreading the voice across everywhere.
Yeah,
right now we are at that stage where I don't stress out, because what I see is this: just look, shared governance being eroded. It's almost like we need to start, and some universities need to start in creating coalitions from nothing. So we are in that process, and right now we're engaging with our president, and Paul can talk a little bit more about this.
Just let me say one thing that you brought up, an important point. I think people need to understand it. Shared governance depends on autonomy of the faculty. And we can take a look at what's happening in red states, as you said. Look at New College in Florida. New College, a small honors college within the University of Florida system. Governor Ron DeSantis appointed an activist board of a board of trustees. Now, usually the trustees are supposed to responsible for fiscal management, but this particular board of trustees was determined to make New College, which had been very liberal, the most conservative college in the country. And they did that within 2 years. They changed the curriculum, disbanded area studies, and brought in a whole bunch of new faculty and changed everything about the college. And that is where shared governance fell apart.
And this is where also I want to also everybody to understand. These folks that are making these changes now, they have a strong strategy, they are in power, and they are very well organized.
Yes.
And I have never lost that focus because this is where it is. You know, what happened in that university, they want to do it all across main universities, and they're using their federal power, the funds, as a way to make this happen. And that's something that we cannot lose sight.
And it's important to keep in mind, I think a bigger picture here, or one thing that you're connecting to with this is this issue of academic freedom. And certainly that was infringed upon in the case you described, potentially if there were professors there who were teaching subjects that the trustees no longer wanted taught, they were pushed out or they were told to teach things differently. I mean, I think one thing that's important to keep in mind, just like with freedom of speech in the First Amendment, academic freedom is nonpartisan, right? So if I had faculty colleagues in my department who had a conservative political orientation and were studying those political topics and coming at it from that perspective, I would have no qualms about that work being put out there if they're doing good science and they're being faithful and showing fidelity to their areas of expertise and not going outside the boundaries of their discipline and making sure that they were behaving in a manner consistent with doing scientific research, no matter what the orientation was. Okay, that's your freedom to inquire and do that kind of research. I think getting back to your original question about what some of the follow-up has been from the time that we passed this, we now have about 60 universities, I think, that have signed on. But I think in addition to the things that David outlined in terms of kind of strengthening internal coalitions at these universities and really getting faculty engaged in this process of first of all, really even understanding what academic freedom means for them and what institutional integrity means for them and how they can support it at their own institutions. We really did, I think, inadvertently, like I said, we expected this to go nowhere. It was an internal Senate document, but we really did bring to light brought this issue to the national spotlight. I mean, I would never have, if you'd asked me a year ago or 5 years ago, you think you'll ever hear the Rachel Maddow show do a feature about university senates? I mean, who cares about university senates? But there it was, a couple weeks after we started this, the show opens with a discussion of Michigan State and how it has an academic senate and how they passed a resolution. It's just the level of attention that this has drawn has really shocked and surprised us, but also I think really hardened us to help see that it's not just university presidents making decisions about what happens at universities, but there are faculty in the trenches trying to make sure that the students coming to us, that our next generation of the labor force, et cetera, are being taught and educated with respect and with integrity.
I don't
Absolutely.
think that many people outside universities really understand academic freedom and why it matters so much. So it's incredibly important that you are explaining this to people who don't have experience with it.
Absolutely. And when you're trying to control curriculum, then you're trying to control knowledge. You're preventing the truth from actually appearing because now I'll be worried. Well, maybe I should not talk about this because I'm going to get in trouble with my politician, or maybe a student doesn't even want to talk about it because he's worried he's going to lose their grant. That's not the right way to teach. That's right. Not the right way to teach.
And these incursions clearly are about trying to take some national control over the freedom that faculty have. And I want to mention this now in case I want to make sure this doesn't get lost in the context of other discussions. But you mentioned David mentioned the list of 60 universities who were going to be sort of targeted for campus anti-Semitism, and that was kind of the pretext for the administration going at Columbia University and how they negotiated that, how they would handle anti-Semitism, et cetera. Yet, after that decision came out, after that agreement came out, and all the details of it were made public, on Fox News, the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, said, "This is a monumental victory for conservatives who wanted to do things on these elite campuses for a long time because we had such far left-leaning professors." That's not anti-Semitism. That's control over content. That is control over the research enterprise. That is saying we don't want our students in these schools to learn from certain faculty, we want them to learn from other faculty. It was about exerting control over higher education as an institution, as an enterprise. It wasn't just about trying to get involved in very specific civil rights issues around how Jewish faculty and students feel on campus. And for the record, I am a Jewish member of the faculty at Rutgers. I take this issue very seriously.
And it's sad using a moment in history to put their political agenda first. They don't even care about students. It's just about their politics. They're just using this as an excuse, and that's not fair. That's not fair for the students.
Well, and it is, of course, one of the first moves of authoritarian regimes to control what can be talked about in classrooms. And what we're seeing is in K-12 as well as in universities, that the control of the.
Oh, absolutely. And these, I mean, some of these organizations have started to K-12. They already have their own standards. They're pushing their standards in red state. They definitely want to control knowledge. They really want to.
So I want you to kind of cast your minds into the future and see where you think this is going. Now, we do have some lawsuits. We have the AAUP, American Association of University Professors, joined with the ACLU. That case is continuing. There may be some legal wins, but what do you want to see specifically happening, and what do you think can happen under these conditions? And let's stay with the public universities for a moment, because it is, as we have said, very different from the elite universities with very deep pockets.
I think one statement that's very fair to make, and this is a knock on all of us, is that public universities, large state universities, yes, we obviously have a very large presence in the states that host us, but I don't think that universities across the board have done the best job at conveying to the general public what it is that we do. Academic freedom, gets a little wonky and abstract, but David does research in chemistry that has direct applications to materials science and how you build things and how you make things, right? The research that I do has direct implications for how youth are handled and processed in the justice system and how we can keep our streets safe, right? So the average person walking around in a community won't look at a building and think, oh, I bet the the polymers or whatever that they use to create that comes out of Salas' lab in Camden, or I feel safe because Boxer worked with the police department last week on how to handle this, right? Like that's not, and we know that because there was a great survey done a few months back. I believe there was, I don't remember who did the survey, but the results were shared on NPR that something like 90% of the American public interacts with things, consumer goods, etc., that emerged through scientific research, federally funded university-based research, but only about 10% of their survey respondents knew that, right? I mean, GPS, that comes out of research in certain ways. So we're not doing a good job selling ourselves beyond, come get your degree here and go get a job, right? I mean, I think we need to be much more vital and much more pushy to an extent in advocating to help the public understand there is a reason that we are here. There are things that we are doing that are of great social benefit, and that is why we need to continue doing these things. And it's not just a credential that you get, a diploma that says, okay, I went to college. You are coming to college at a time in your life when you are ready to learn and think and appreciate the world in different ways. And that's why, for example, we have liberal arts, general education curricula. So we don't have students coming in and only taking classes with David or only taking classes with me, taking classes with everybody. Learn about literature, learn about history, learn about science, learn about this, learn about that. We're trying to create a better society for everyone, not just one sector or another. But that is something that is hard to get across. And I think that's, to some extent, that's on us for our own public relations outreach to be thinking more clearly about.
Absolutely. I think this will push that forward in terms of us talking more about in our community. Even myself, I've been trying to talk with our local cafe shop and say, maybe would you like an idea where I could perhaps present my research to the community? And our coffee shop here is like, yeah, that would be awesome. So, I think things like this will start changing as we express more about what the impact of our research. But I think by unifying, by having the faculty unify, you have to think about this, and I want the public to understand this. When you're an assistant professor, a lot of the stress is all about getting grants, writing papers. So a lot of professors are not even part of chair governance or senate because we are so stressed in getting this work. Then when you pass that level and you are in this associate professor level, this is where you now start learning a little bit more about the university and you start thinking more about your impact because you went through that process. You had to explain to the other faculty what was the impact that you did to the community. Now you start thinking about this, and as you go into an associate professor to full professor, you're really into thinking how your job is actually changing minds, how your job is actually creating a student. For example, in my case, when I have all these grants, my students get training on all these characterization equipment that are very sophisticated that we own. That then when they go to when they go to Dow Chemicals or Arkema or any chemical company, they're ready to solve problems. That is the goal of this grant. So while we are advancing science little by little, I'm training the next generation of workers that are going to go to these corporations and solve problem the first day. So I think by unifying all the faculty, I think we're going to be able to kind of push to the community that we have not done a good job in explaining what we actually do. But I want to make a statement really quickly. In a public university, we represent every student for whatever political party. And also, we're trying to create an environment where we also have international students coming in so our students have a global perspective. Because when they go to a company like Arkema, they need to go to France, they need to go to Asia to solve problems. So I wanted to make sure that my student is prepared, and Rutgers knows this. They want to make sure that you have friends in those areas so that you can solve quickly problems. But when I'm teaching, nobody tell me that I have to teach one way or another way. We just teach evidence-based science. And when I have a student tell me, what do you think about? Well, that's true. Some students challenge me about carbon dioxide and global warming. I'm like, well, if you think about it, yes, we're producing all this carbon. So where is it going? I mean, if we're cutting trees, that means that they're not going to be, they're not going to turn into leaf. So, but you know what? In 20 years, do you think you care if you have a little business to make money and you are doing other ways to control the CO2? And I make that, I make those statements so they can resonate with every band, you know? So it's important for the public to understand this. Nobody's telling me how to teach one way or another one. It all comes in the classroom when the students are free to ask any question that comes in their mind. But Sally, you are muted.
Sorry. You think that many people think that colleges are now only vocational. And what you're saying is, yes, you do train your students to do things, to know things that they will be able to use in their working life. But what you're doing is situating that in a much larger context. And that now what we're saying is, what I'm hearing you two saying is that faculty need to step up and become public intellectuals who can explain that more. Paul, would you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I'm not a public relations person myself. I can be inarticulate at times, and I'm not sure what messaging is going to resonate with what communities. And even when I'm out, my kids play club sports, and they're on their sports teams at schools, and sometimes they're with other parents who have no connection to universities. They might have gone to university themselves years ago, and they ask me what I do, and oh, you're a professor. Okay, so you teach, and what do you? There's not a whole lot of like general grasp of what it is we do. So I do think that's on us. I think though that and this gets a little bit more abstract, but as you're suggesting, Sally, I think it's more than just trying to remind the general public that we train students to learn how to work certain jobs and go out into the labor sector and get jobs. And I mean, that's part of it, obviously, but we also want our students to have have broader learning capacity and broader problem solving capacity and a broader appreciation for anything that they might encounter, whether, you know, they might become a material scientist, but that doesn't mean that they can't go to an art museum and appreciate what they're seeing hanging on the walls, right? You know, when I teach my classes on child development and mental health and those kinds of issues, I'm not just, you know, dispensing information from a textbook, but I'm talking to my students about how can we even understand this problem, right? If you see a child who's struggling for some reason, what are all the different reasons why that might be? Let's ask questions about this. Let's make some hypotheses about why kids have challenges in classrooms. Well, is it this or is it that? And how can we design a study to figure that out? And now when you approach the world more generally outside of my classroom, and you read a news article about something happening, or you come across someone experiencing some challenge, you don't just have to accept at face value what you're being told. You can actually investigate that issue yourself, and you can become a critical thinker, and you can listen to a news story and think, well, they're saying this about vaccines and autism, for example. That's a topic that we cover. You know, well, we don't have to speculate about whether there's a link. There's actually been research done. So let's look at the research studies. What do they show, right? So we're training our students how to think. I mean, that's really kind of the highest level of outcome, I think, for a college degree, which is you come out of it, you go into it knowing a little bit, and you come out of it maybe knowing a little bit more, but now you know how to acquire that knowledge for yourself because you are being taught and trained on how to think critically and understand things from different perspectives. And I get that to some folks that is a scary prospect, right? I mean, the idea that I've raised my kids, I'm, you know, talking about my own kids now. I've raised my kids, you know, they lived in my house, go to school for 17 years, or, you know, K through 12 education, and now they're at college. You know, they might go to a college and meet a professor or meet other kids who have perspectives really different from mine, and now they're learning things and taking on beliefs that are really different. But to me, I think that would be amazing, right? My son is in school right now. You know, come back and argue with me about something that you once thought I agreed with you on, and now you don't agree with me anymore. But let's talk about it because now you're learning different things, and your brain is getting, you know, not literally getting bigger, but you know, your mind is expanding. And so that is really what higher education is for. It's not just for training the next workforce, although that's a great byproduct because we need our workforce to keep our country going and to keep our country great. I mean, a commitment to higher education is an extremely patriotic venture because it keeps our democracy strong. It supports our liberty. It supports the fact that we have, you know, the best scientific research infrastructure in the world. We are the most, you know, the innovations that we generate, the findings that we put out there, the people that we train, our institutions of higher education are the best in the world. And we just want to sustain that.
And that's the key. You said something really cool, Paul, about this. College, for the first time, when you go to college, this is where you're going to have friends that perhaps are not part of your nucleus. This is where you're going to have the police officer kid merging with with the doctor kid and becoming friends. Inner city, rural kids, international student. This is the first time where you might be in a room and your roommate is crying, and when you ask why you're crying, there's a big hurricane coming to my town, and you start asking, where's your town? Oh, Puerto Rico. What's happening there? And for the first time, you start learning where is Puerto Rico, where this hurricane is doing, and how I can help because my roommate is crying because their family's losing their house or whatever. You see, this is the first time that you start listening to international kids suffering. That something happened in their township. Of me here in Philadelphia, that I never heard about that town. For the first time, my kid will listen to that and connections will start happening. So when they come to the classroom, what do you think will happen? Professor, why hurricanes are turning so fast, so quickly? And the debate start happening. So universities is a bridge for all this. This umbrella where all this is connection is happening. And you cannot stop it. And I feel that by controlling curriculum, by controlling what you teach, you're breaking the foundation of what is university is about, which is about human connection and asking questions.
Well, I mean, you all have both said rather different, but extremely inspiring things because the key issues are critical thinking and empathetic listening connection. That these can be the greatest gift that a university education gives to those who are lucky enough, and of course in a public institution that is opening the doors to more and more people to get that education. So we're coming to the end of our time, but I want to know, is there anything that we need to have said that that hasn't been said yet or that hasn't been addressed? I mean, you've given a very powerful vision of why the university can be so important and what it can do for everybody, right? And pointing out also that that might be a scary thing for those who wish to control the population, because critical thinking and empathy are the opposite of control. They are about openness.
I think one thing worth saying, and I've alluded to this at various times in other conversations, but along in the spirit of openness, um, I think it's fair to say, I can't speak for university presidents. I don't know where their minds are at on this kind of issue, but I think I can speak for a lot of my colleagues who serve on faculties around the country, especially in large, comprehensive public universities like ours. We would happily, gladly invite and welcome anyone into our classroom to engage with us on any of these issues. If there is someone within the US Department of Education who thinks that the way in which current contemporary psychology is being taught is somehow problematic, I would welcome them to come to my classroom and engage me on that exact issue. I will present research findings, I will present studies, and I will happily argue with them, debate with them, talk with them, communicate with them, whatever it takes to come to a mutual understanding of what it is that we are doing. I once had a student in my class on where I teach about child psychopathology, and we were talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. And the student said, "I'm listening to you talk about PTSD, and it sounds like people who get PTSD are just weak." And my whole class was, "Oh, I can't believe somebody would suggest something like that." But we talked about it, and we worked through it, and I showed statistics, and I showed data, and I talked about how we understand PTSD, what it all means. And that student got to the point of like, okay, I understand, right? So a lot of this is, now I'm not saying that we have to open up our arms to the people who want to destroy higher education. I don't think everybody who's in the Trump administration wants to destroy higher education. But I certainly think that there are a lot of individuals who are working on that side who have distorted beliefs about what higher education is and what actually happens in classrooms. Maybe they had a very bad experience themselves when they were in college. I mean, you mentioned Vance going around talking about how college is just this terrible, awful place, but the man is walking around with a JD from Yale, right? So what happened to him when he was in his law school program that got him to the point where he now thinks that somehow universities are bad, right? We can have these conversations. I mentioned at one point, the president himself is welcome to come into a Zoom meeting with me anytime he wants, and we can talk about these kinds of things and have a real conversation about that. If we all want to make America great or keep America great, we all have a stake in that. We can come to a consensus through legitimate, scholarly, open, empathic discourse. I realize this sounds pie in the sky, and I'm already talking too much, but I do think that's certainly one thing that a lot of us would be willing to do, would be engage in real conversations around these issues with anyone.
What you said earlier was that we are not doing a good enough job of explaining to people what we really do in universities, and what you have been saying is really helping to let people understand that. So, is there anything, David, that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I just, want to add to, so this is all about students, and, want the public to understand we're working very hard to make sure that the student continue with the right experience. So if you're a parent, if you're a student going back to college again or returning for college, I'm telling you this, we are working very hard so you can continue the experience, learning, asking questions without worrying. That's the key, and we want that in your classroom. And for the students that are listening, form coalitions, join faculty, give us your experience of how the grants or by cutting this program is affecting your future. Because again, universities not all to make money. Universities is to teach the community about connectivity, have this higher level of understanding. So we will learn, and Sally, I think this is coming. I think we will learn from the students. Students are being dormant. Some of them are little by little coming in for the semester starting, and I got a feeling that we will see a huge energy coming in. And I think the students are going to be the strongest voice to protect higher education. Right now, we've been battling all summer, but I got a feeling that when the semester starts, we're going to see a huge energy of wait a second, this is no good. And I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful about that. So we will see.
I think football season is going to be a potentially big organizing point as well. I mean, the Big Ten football, there's a lot of fans, Big Ten basketball, volleyball, all these sports that alumni and the folks who live in those states just love to support and watch. These things would not exist without the university sector supporting them, because we're not just about producing, high level athletes, but they are student athletes, and the vast majority of them don't go on to become professionals. They become professionals in their sports. They go and get regular jobs like the rest of us, and that education is extremely valuable to them. So hopefully, as David suggests, students coming back to campus, faculty coming back to campus, everyone's been away for the summer. There's a lot of energy. People love their universities. We love Rutgers. These are things that are valuable to us and that need to persist and continue.
And also, I also want to mention for the faculties that are on states that are that are changing their chair governance, please go around, look for outside organizations. We're looking to form coalitions. I think faculty also we're trying to learn exactly what is happening in your state. So don't feel that you're by yourself. I think when you start looking around, you'll see a big coalition of faculty and unions that are here to help and here to figure out a new path for those states.
Well, I want to say a big thank you to both of you, David Salas-de Cruz and Paul Boxer, both from Rutgers University. First of all, for your leadership in articulating so early on a response that resonated, obviously, with so many other university professors. And second, for the inspiring way that you have articulated now why this matters so much and why it's a fight worth having, and for your ideas about how to continue that fight. So thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally, for taking the time in this interview.